have two problems in interiors photography. The first one is colors. And you know, the reason why we have color problems is because the cool light is coming in through the windows and sort of the warm light is mixing with that cool light, and it just causes all these problems, and it just makes a really it just tends to muck up our photos just in general. So color is the first problem we deal with in interiors work. What's the other problem? The only other problem we have really is dynamic range. So we're looking at the outside, you know, through the window. The outside is usually going to be quite a bit lighter than the inside of the room, right? It's going to be, say, 2 or 3 stops lighter on the outside. So those are the two problems we really have with interiors photography: color and dynamic range. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the solutions to these two problems, but discuss them both in terms of using flash and then using something like HDR or Infuse. So let's look at dynamic range first, because I think that's really simpler, so we're going to check that out first. So dynamic range is actually really easily taken care of with flash. I'm not going to get all into the specifics here, but honestly, the basics of it are you just need to get some light close to the window or around the window with your flash, and you've pretty much completely taken care of the dynamic range problem. There's a multitude of different ways to sort of take care of that window and the dynamic range between the inside and the outside if you're using flash. And it's a really, really simple process. Now, the solution with HDR is going to be, some would argue it's easier to do it with HDR in terms of the dynamic range, that they just, you know, run off a set of brackets. I would personally argue that shooting a flash frame is just as easy as running off some brackets, but that's a little bit beside the point. But I personally believe flash is just as fast, if not faster. But let's forget about that for now, and let's just look at how well does HDR handle our dynamic range. It does a pretty good job, right? And it does it quick and simple for people. People have a really sort of, it makes sense to them, right? They're gonna get 5 exposures and they're gonna sort of blend all those together in post, and the window is gonna be pulled in that instance, right? But what happens is HDR doesn't even do that great of a job. So first of all, you're doing the work, you know, you're getting the extra exposures, you're having to deal with them, download them to your computer, but then it just sort of gives you it tends to give a sort of muddy and just not a very clear rendition of the window pulls. So I'm not a big fan of the window pulls with the HDR method. So just to put it in a sentence or two, I would even argue that the HDR method, as opposed to flash, they both take about the same amount of time, and yet you don't get nearly as good a results with the HDR methods. So let's talk about the solutions for our color problems in interiors photography. So if you're using flash, it's just as simple as sort of killing your ambient light with your shutter speed, and you're sort of killing the ambient, and then you're filling in the room with your flashlight, and your colors are all of a sudden just magically becoming a lot more consistent. And so in a sentence again, it's really, really easy to correct all of your color problems with flash. You might have to do a couple, you know, a bounce over here, you maybe a 2 light setup, and you're just cleaning up all the colors within that space with your flash. And the irony here is, most of the time when you're cleaning these 2 areas, let's say you have a 2 light setup, you're cleaning up all your colors with your flash, right? Well, guess what? You're gonna get your window pulled just automatically. So you're automatically now taking care of our first problem, which was dynamic range. So we just saw that to take care of our problems of color, we just use our flash. And not only that, we're actually getting our dynamic range problem with the color taken care of. So what about HDR? How does HDR handle color? Well, the truth is, the way I would put it is HDR doesn't even have a solution for the color. In fact, I would even argue that HDR exacerbates color problems, and it actually puts color problems onto you to, you know, so that you have to fix. And it kind of muddies up some areas of like wall. Everyone knows this, right? Like a wall that should be white, it might turn kind of gray. And of course it depends on your HDR software, right? But it might turn kind of a grayish, and then you have more of a tendency to get some of those colors in there, and they're getting saturated, and it just doesn't handle it right. And so, in short, again, in a sentence, you're sort of exacerbating your color problems with HDR. In other words, you're making problems for yourself using this method. You're actually making problems for yourself. So I think it's so clear when you look at it like this. So with Flash, we're easily taking care of our dynamic range. Not only that, once we take care of our colors with the Flash, it's also taking care of that dynamic range problem. With HDR, it's actually making problems for us. So we're going in reverse. So I really think just looking at it very simply like this, it's a really strong indicator that, you know, it's a much more efficient system to be using Flash. And I feel like we're seeing this. You know, I personally feel like, I haven't done like a tally or anything, but I feel like we're seeing a lot of photographers move to Flash. And I think the reason is because they're seeing like the results and how much clarity and how much contrast they're getting with their flashlight when they use Flash. And then how kind of muddy and flat photos can turn out when you're just using the incandescent lights. So to sum up here, we only have those two problems to take care of in interiors photography: color and dynamic range. In my opinion, dynamic range, I don't think HDR is that great at it. It's just not that great. It sort of muddies up the view. It just sort of turns your, you know, photo into like a fairy tale. And the color issue, guess what? It's not that great at that either. Not only is it not that great at it, but it actually exacerbates your problems. It actually puts problems onto you that you're gonna have to get in there and fix later. So it's making you go in reverse. So I think just breaking it down really simply like that into those two problems that we have, and how effective Flash is versus how effective or ineffective HDR is, I think it should be a real indicator for all you guys out there kind of on the fence between HDR and Flash, that you should absolutely go with Flash. Don't let this notion that Flash is slower, you know, seep into your head. I don't believe that's true. You might move slower at the beginning because you're sort of learning how to. I think this is true for anybody, you know, like if you were going to be an auto mechanic, you're going to go slow at the beginning, right? You don't know what you're doing, but after a while, you're going to be, you know, throwing a transmission in and out of there in 30 minutes, right? But, you know, when you're starting, that might take you a week. So the point is here, don't let that notion of how slow you're going to go with Flash keep you back from using that method. It's really not true, first of all, and you're just going to have to work out those kinks. But I hope this information serves you well, and I hope it, you know, kicks you off onto the correct side of the fence. I really believe that Flash is the right way to go. I wouldn't say that unless I truly believed it.